the last session. All of you are already tired, but we will still bug you for a few minutes. So this presentation, so you have already heard from me and Dr. Ashutosh in the morning about high resolution techniques to look into protein structures. Essentially, both myself and Shankar will share this presentation, and we would have wanted to present this stuff first and then talk from then we wanted to go from low resolution to high resolution. But somehow the schedule, because of Dr. Ashutosh unavailability in the evening session, we decided to go in the reverse order. So now I have to somehow present all the positives for something which I do not recommend. Anyway, we will talk about good things about CD, because CD, while I was talking about in the morning session that is not a high resolution technique, still it is extremely important, and extremely important for various reasons. And one of the most important reason is its complementarity of information with respect to other high resolution techniques. Now, before I go to the main presentation, I just want to tell you why I am saying complementary information and why it is critical, because it gives you signatures of your secondary structural elements, which NMR cannot give directly. What Dr. Ashutosh was showing in the morning is a signature which you obtained after months of effort. But this you can directly get after putting the qubit into the JASCO or whatever instrument you have in your place. So therefore it is extremely important. Now, why we should use it? Again, we should use it because every protein has a unique signature, and that signature should come as a constant output of your API or a drug product across different batches you have released. And therefore it's important that we should have a robust method which actually gives me same unique information time and again. So how we do validation of those methods, Shankar will cover in this section. I will briefly touch upon some of the intricacies related to what we achieve from CD spectroscopy, and then we'll show you some examples in my subsequent slides. Okay, so this slide everyone has seen in the morning and probably has been shown to you multiple times. Shows you that how many orthogonal techniques we use to actually essentially prove that our product is a biosimilar to a reference product or innovator product. And it's important because as of today, all the regulatory agencies would like to see most of these assays to be performed, despite some of them are low resolution, some of them are high resolution. It's again because of the reason that we would like to see orthogonal information from different techniques, and that each technique should be able to give me similar information. So basically it's a totality of evidence is what is required. Fine. Okay, so see what we want to achieve. We want to see whether are we similar, and that's the goal. Of course, if I take this out, you will see they are not similar. So you have to prove that what you have is actually similar. So we again use all those fantastic techniques which I was talking to you in the morning, and the low resolution technique as well, to prove that something is very, very important. And again, the importance lies because of the fact that it is your structure which governs your function. So question comes back again, whether if the site of interaction actually gets perturbed because of whatever reasons, thermal degradation, degradation due to some other factor, because of excipient, because of preparation, then your function definitely can get perturbed. Right? So again, all these things I have already talked about in the morning session, and therefore not just circular dichroism, but also we'll briefly talk about FTIR as well. Just to give you what we see in FTIR and CPs. Okay, so all proteins are chiral. Does everybody agree? Why? Because amino acids are chiral, right? So if a chiral molecule sees a circularly left or right circularly polarized light, it sees them differently, and it is this difference is what you see as a part of CD spectrum. Now proteins, or there are different chromophores at different wavelength which absorb this light. For example, around 214 nanometer, which chromophore in amino acids do you think, or peptide chains do you think absorbs light? It's the amide bond. So essentially, it is the amide bond around 214. So CD spectroscopy is split into two. One is a far UV CD spectroscopy, which governs from 119 nanometer to 250 nanometers, and then near UV CD, which is from 250 nanometer to 320 nanometers. Sometimes 350 people go. Now, different chromophores absorbs at different range. Because around 210 to 220, it is the peptide chain which absorbs, and peptide bond actually, or the amide bond forms or is a major contributor towards the secondary structure element. You see a signature around that because of that. Because of the absorption within this range, which is 190 to 250 nanometers. So each of these secondary structure element actually has a signature. So this is lysines, a polypeptide made out of lysines, and is formulated under different condition. And you see, under each condition, you see a different pattern. For example, this blue typically provides an information on beta sheet pattern, while alpha helical has a typical signature where it has two minima, one around 208 nanometer, other one is around 222 nanometer. So every single time you see a protein where you see this kind of signature, you have to understand that this protein certainly has some structural content which is alpha helical in nature. Now how we do calculation about how much content, Shankar will be talking about that in a short while, that how we calculate those structures. Again, I have to tell you very clearly, which Shankar will also talk about it, but all these numbers are approximations, they are not accurate and precise. So if somebody in your laboratory asks you to get these numbers time and again, yes, you can get those numbers, but they are not always the true numbers. Because even minor components of excipient which you remove, the minor residuals can still cause slight differences in your numbers, and your number estimates can go off. So it is very important to understand that these numbers are rough estimates of your product. However, it still gives you good information that your protein is either in alpha nature or in beta sheet or in random coil state. So is this valuable information? It is a valuable information, because in the early stage of your program, people try to quickly want to assess whether the product is properly folded or not. So if you know the nature of your product, you will look for that signature, and this signature can come in short while. You fill your sample in the cuvette, you run this far UVCD, you see this particular signature of your product, then you say, I'm happy. Now, what happens actually? These are like 100% either alpha helical or 100% beta sheet or a random coil structure which has this signature. But actual protein may or may not be like that. You may have a protein which has a mix of alpha helical and beta sheet and random coil and beta turns. Right? Beta turns are usually turns which connect two of your secondary structure elements. Now, Then how does software calculates? It usually calculates it as a, so whatever output you get as a result, it calculates as a fraction of each of these components added to give you that value. And when you have multiple points, you have multiple equations to solve. And if you have only 4 elements, how many such points you require to solve an equation? If you have 4 variables, you require 4 points. So if you have 4 good equations, you can actually get right numbers. But because you run your spectrum across entire range, you have almost like hundreds of points, or whatever you have set as a control in your method, you will have so many points, and therefore you can have more precise results. Accurate, they may not be accurate, but they will be precise. So constantly, if you run them time and again, you will see high precision in the values. Okay. What is the sample requirement? So, see, proteins, because in this region, which is 190 to 250, your protein absorbs because of the presence of amide bonds, and because of the presence of amide bond, which is present all over the chain, your sample requirement is also less. And therefore, typically you can use in the order of 0.50 micrograms to 5 mg, anything is possible. The challenge with CD is because you may have buffers which also absorbs in the same range. So you may have to choose the right buffers. So again, what you have to do is to extract your product. So now you tell me in which particular stage of your product development you should use CD as a tool. Should it be used more for drug product evaluation or drug substance, which is the API? What do you think would be a better? Drug substance, because it is not formulated under those conditions, right? So if you can use that, I think if yes, because MAbs sometimes are produced under the same conditions, then if the formulated conditions are same like the drug product, then again you have to extract it, which is not recommended all the time. So what you do, sometimes you dilute it with your placebo to go into a region where you can still measure the content. So all those tricks you have to play. So,
but if we are measuring the drug substance, it will be dissolved in certain buffer.
yes.
And the secondary structure taken by that molecule in that buffer and the formulation would differ.
Correct. That's
So how
possible.
would we?
Yeah, that is why I think that is the reason why we think it may not be the most accurate technique. No, for a biosimilar industry, because you treat your reference product in the same way as you treat your biosimilar product, you show a comparability between the results assessed under the same conditions. That is how we justify it, and that is done across all over the globe, and regulators have accepted as of today.
I'll come to that point.
He will also come.
I'll come to that point also. Yeah.
Fine. So now the tertiary structure. Now, tertiary structure. Why? How CD actually provides you information on its tertiary structure? So tertiary structure. The range is from 250 to 320 actually, typically, but we go up to 350. Typically, this is how the experiments are done. Now in this region, it is the aromatics which absorb the light. Aromatics means tryptophan, tyrosines, phenylalanines, and also the disulfide absorbs, but they give you a very broad spectrum, which is from 250 to 320, all across the plane. So the contribution from disulfide is actually minimal. You may not be able to notice it. But tryptophan, tyrosines, phenylalanine, they contribute in distinctive regions. So phenylalanine, for example, probably absorbs around 250 to 270, and then tyrosine from 270 to 285, and around 290 to 300 is the tryptophan. So if you, and out of the three, anyone knows which amino acid absorbs maximum? Tryptophan. So if your protein doesn't have a tryptophan, then you would need higher concentration of your samples, especially for running these. Because anyway, these aromatic groups are fewer in the chain in your peptide. So always, in comparison to far UVCD, you always require larger concentration of your product. Now, how it reflects information on the tertiary structure? The information content comes because some of these tryptophan or phenylalanine or tyrosines are buried inside the chains or inside the structure. And some may be exposed to the environment. So if my structure is appropriately folded just like the innovator structure, the tryptophans or phenylalanines or tyrosines should see the same light and same environment around it. And therefore the signature which comes out of it has to match with the signature. If because of some reason, because of exposure to the excipient, exposure to stability, means degradation, heat, whatever, if your tertiary structure gets altered, you will also see those differences in the signature of your tertiary structure. Now what you see again is a very low resolution information, but it is an important information because if you do not have NMR, which is an expensive technique, if you do not have X-ray, if you do not have HXMS, at least you have an immediate information for your product to know whether it is appropriately folded under the same conditions or not. So it is still very important. So you require more concentration of your protein, and I told you why. Again, some of those components absorbed in a similar range, so it may not be the right tube. So you have to choose the right buffers, and the biggest challenge with CD, as I have been telling, is that you may not be able to run them in the same conditions, which is the formulated drug product. Okay. So I have jotted down few examples how we actually, or what else we can do. So one of the typical analysis people do is to see whether I was showing it through NMR. If you remember, I was showing a SDS gel, and you see a band coming very nicely. But if you want to understand whether that is properly folded or not, you can run NMR. But if it is not available, you have to go for some other alternative techniques. And CD is beautiful in that because the signature will tell you whether your protein is folded or not. Despite not knowing how much is the content and all, you will still feel happy about it that yes, there is some secondary structure element which is present. This does not tell you anything about the tertiary structure fold. So it tells you only about the secondary structure. So again, it's very important. So if you want to assess a product which is say kept at say 60 degrees for a few days, and you want to see whether my product is still intact, there is no change in secondary structure element, go for CD activity. If there is a clear change in your secondary structure, then your protein is definitely part. Now, same thing you can also do for tertiary structure as well. Of course, you need slightly higher concentration, but you can still run in the tertiary structure case. So, in the tertiary structure, if your protein is perturbed, you will see a change in the tertiary structure pattern or whatever profile you have got in the control condition. So see, this is a profile which has come out of entire range of your product. So maybe this product, when it was made, is placed in a buffer which doesn't absorb within the range specified for both far UVCD and near UVCD. And I'm sure this product must have multiple number of tryptophans or so that you still get a decent signal in this range. Probably more of phenylalanine because phenylalanine comes in this region. The tryptophans are usually around this, so you have signals which are coming from phenylalanine and probably from some tyrosines. Now you see, in two places, you clearly see a distinct difference between the wild type and a cataract. The mutant form which actually goes towards the cataract disease. And you see that those differences are substantial because when the same experiment was run multiple times, you see that the error is only very minor. So which means that yes, there is a change in tertiary structure. But again, question from something what Dr. Ashutosh said in the morning, is that difference going to bring a difference in your functional activity? This technique cannot tell you. So for that you need to have an assessment using some biofunctional assays also. Even NMR cannot tell you. NMR can only give you back information once you have a functional assay data, that whether there is a substantial difference at the site of binding or not. Okay. Okay. So I am just showing you a plot. So where exactly there are fallbacks. So this is one map which is Herceptin, is innovator, and biosimilar is, and they both are overlaid on the top of each other. If I do not show you this, this looks excellent match, and show you that the tertiary structure is, secondary structure is very well mapped onto each other, and therefore my product is actually a biosimilar from CD perspective. Is that correct? Right? Now I have a Humira, which is another map, and I run this, and this also looks similar because both biosimilar and the innovator product are on the top of each other. But look at this interesting part. What is the secondary structure content here? Beta sheet. So if my map is full of beta sheet, I will only see the beta sheet pattern. Now, if I superimpose this on the top of this, would they superimpose? They should superimpose, no? Because essentially the difference between two maps is only in the CDR regions. Essentially the backbone is same. So I will not be able to distinguish between Herceptin versus Humira in a significant manner. And that is where the technique has a fallback. While they still give you a good information that both are present. So Humira and biosimilars, we were making biosimilar against for Humira, and we failed actually in the clinical trials for this product. And I showed you today in the morning one spectrum where I showed you very nice overlay of map versus the biosimilar and showed you few differences. And because NMR was not run at that time, we never knew that there is a difference between tertiary structures of the. So that's where the strength of NMR is, that it can provide you that information that you have, if you have a differences in the tertiary structure at a atomic resolution. So this technique cannot. Okay. So same way for insulins, I have Humulin, which is human insulin, and it's biosimilar. Do you see what kind of secondary structure you see here? Because there are two minimas, one around 208, another around 222. It shows that it is alpha helical. And when we look at the crystal structure, it also shows you it is more of the alpha helical. So the signature is correct. But that is true with the analog as well. Again, you see a very nice same helical pattern. If I take this and put it on the top of this, they also match. So it cannot distinguish between analogs if overall structure is not damaged. So that is where there is a fallback or a shortcoming in this technique. However, if I independently treat this or this, I will see a signature, which will tell me my protein is well folded under this condition. And that's already a good information. It's just that you want to increase your wealth of knowledge to elucidate to the highest level. That can happen later on. Okay. So These are some of the learnings that it provides information on both secondary and tertiary structure. Every protein has a unique signature. Same family may not, but otherwise they have a unique signature. It can compare proteins obtained from different sources, which means different expression systems. So for example, Mycon produces insulin in yeast expression system, which is Pichia, while our innovator produces same protein in E. coli or in Saccharomyces, which is also yeast expression system. But at the end, the outcome has to be same. So can we assess that? Yes, we can assess that because I just showed you humulin versus a biosimilar, they are on the top of each other, which are made out of different expression systems. So yes, it can assess. It can compare different mutants. I also showed you because you saw when there was a mutant, you still see some differences between the two. So you can assess those differences, can demonstrate comparability of solution conformation and or thermal stability. So assume that you have kept your sample for at 60 degrees for a longer period of time. It may damage your protein, but easy way to assess is go for a signature. Same way, it also helps you in identifying or screening the right excipients. If my excipients are killing my secondary structure, I have to change that. So thankfully, whatever we saw for both humulin and Humira. So essentially, I just want to go back to this slide, and we had a different excipient. So this structure did not show you any difference. NMR showed you later on. So those things are definitely you need to match. Okay. This is also very important. I did not touch this, but if you have a protein-protein interaction, and if that protein-protein interaction brings a change in the secondary structure. So what happens, if you read more about the structural biology, protein-protein interaction, you will see many proteins, if they are naturally in random coil state or unfolded state, upon interaction with a ligand partner, they fold. They fold in some secondary structure. And those structure changes, if they are massive, you will be able to notice it. Okay. So those are few important things. Now I'll quickly go for FTIR, quick one, because then we can take up. So what do we measure? We measure bond vibrations, right? So these vibrations can be CO stretching, and these are the two major ones. Not that others are not there, but these are the two distinctive ones. And the reason we measure these two, because they form the peptide bond, CO and H, right? So because they form the peptide bond, and peptide bond in a different secondary structural pattern have different environments. These bands, the amide 1 and amide 2 bands, can actually come at different frequencies in your FTIR spectrum. And again, just like signatures, what we talked about in CD spectroscopy, FTIR also has signatures. So if you have your amide 1 band, so important point is, it is mostly the amide 1 band which gives you the information on your secondary structures in FTIR spectrum. The other is only for confirmation. All softwares which brings out the information of secondary structure from FTIR spectrum only uses information from the amide 1 band, not from amide 2. So it is the amide 1 band. So you have to see for this. And if your protein has an alpha helical nature, the amide 1 band will come around 1650. If your protein has a bit more of beta sheet, it will come around this. Random coil will show around this. And these are the typical signatures of FTIR spectrum.
Wait, I have a question. So like you have written this approx number 160. let's say I'm getting a value around 1635
Yes.
in between these two.
Yes.
Which one I will consider?
Okay. So if you have 1635, it will then have mixture of populations more from beta sheet and alpha helix. Now, this is just how they deconvolute the spectrum. See, in this is a amide 1 band which is deconvoluted into multiple forms of your secondary structures. You see, turns, then beta sheet, turns, alpha helix. I don't know what it is, but unordered, beta sheet, side, etc. So essentially, the populations of each of these species comes from addition of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever number of bands you can deconvolute. And software does it for you. Again, the numbers are rough estimate. So if my protein is same, if I run a CD and FTIR, should I get the same secondary structure numbers? If I run a CD, far UVCD and FTIR on the same protein, should I observe same secondary structure numbers? Actually yes, because protein is not changed, right? But it doesn't happen. So you may see a difference in the numbers. So this is what his question was. If you change the environment and change the technique, I should be seeing reference product and my product showing the same numbers or similar numbers, and then I'm okay. So those are the challenges with this low resolution technique, that they do not give you accurate numbers, though the numbers are still fair estimate of your product. Okay, so quickly again, I look at Herceptin and I look at Humira. The two spectrum from the biosimilarity point of view all show around 16-30 centimeter. It tells me that the product is more of a beta sheet, which is actually true as well. Again, this one similarly, yes, but if I take this and place it on the top of this, more or less the amide 1 band information will come around the same numbers, similar numbers, which will tell me products are similar, but I cannot actually distinct them so well between Humira and Herceptin. And that is the problem with these techniques. However, again, it gives you fair information about the band position, which tells you it is reasonably well folded and has abundance of beta sheet in it. For insulins, because it is more of alpha helical in nature, you see the band position is more towards 1650 centimeter, and therefore I can proudly tell my protein is well folded and it has more of alpha helical nature. But again, if I put it on the top of each other, they will again overlap, and they will not give me distinct information between humulin and lantus, while these two are different from the amino acid sequence. So high resolution information is missing, but fairly some information is there. So I will not go for an mRNA. That's it. I will stop here and I'll give Shankar to talk about it. Talk about the I think process, how we validate such methods, and also about evaluation of secondary structures from CDTP. Thank you so much, guys.